Hey, and welcome to this episode of State of the Hack. We're in San Francisco for RSA. I'm Nick Carr.
And I'm Christopher Glyer.
And we're here with Regina Elwell.
Now, you may notice our background is slightly better than last year when we tried to do it at RSA, when we filmed Alex Landstein and on the episode, and it was kind of plan B, had mostly concrete background. We got lots of jokes.
We're upgrading it. We're upgrading. And what's this?
It's well, these are a bunch of the threat groups that we've upgraded this year. In 2018, we upgraded APT 37 and 38, which are a tribute to North Korea, and 39, which is Iran, and APT 40, which is China.
Awesome. Well, let's get into it. So, again, we have Regina with us, and I get to the pleasure of working closely with Regina on our team. And I want to get a little bit into, before we get into the meat of the episode, which we're going to talk a lot about M-Trends, our annual report that came out. Regina does a lot of the work behind the scenes. So can you give a little bit about your background? And we like to talk about how people got into the industry.
Yeah, I guess first off, cheers.
Oh, yeah. The important stuff.
Yeah, we've got a San Francisco beer, a Kolsch, so. Yeah, so how'd you get in the industry? What's your background? How you get started?
So my background isn't this industry at all. I actually have an undergraduate degree in biology, minored in chemistry from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Go Heels. Worked in a completely different industry for 3 years and wasn't necessarily satisfied with that, and kind of got interested, read Cliff Stoll's A Cuckoo's Egg,
Nice.
and I was like, this is really interesting. Actually started looking into graduate programs for this. So went to George Washington University and got a Master's of Science in High Technology Crime Investigation, so very specifically in computer forensics, network intrusion investigation. Nice. When I finished up that program, I applied for a job at Mandiant. So I started as an associate consultant working on incident response engagements, specifically for APT, for FIN actors. More or less kind of became a subject matter expert on financial threat actors. It just happened to be kind of like my wheelhouse in the engagements that I got on. And then a year and a half ago, I moved over to the adversary pursuit team. So now instead of doing the actual investigation component, I'm taking a step back and then looking at the information that we find there, and doing modeling to say, have we seen this before? What type of malware is this? And then actually starting to do the attribution component.
Nice. It's kind of fun. The three of us used to all work together on Mandiant IRs in the Alexandria office, and now kind of different places, but all still working together.
Yeah.
So, and it's pretty funny that you read that book, and now you're doing just about the thing closest to what's in the book. So, nice work.
Yeah.
That's pretty solid.
If you can dream it, you can do it.
Yeah. Nice.
Was there anything in that transition? Were there things that you did to either better prepare yourself, or what resources did you use other than just going to school that did you find really helpful?
I did a couple of basic certification stuff because I wasn't necessarily in industry. So I did the A+, the Net+, Security+, that type of stuff just for basic knowledge.
Yep.
I'd also taken multiple computer science courses while I was in undergrad, just as electives that kind of
Nice.
really didn't have anything. So I had a little bit of background there. But really for me, it was a lot about the analytical mindset, being able to step back and look at the full picture. One of the great things about the program at GW is it's all taught by adjunct professors. So they're all people doing it in industry and then teaching these classes at night. So one of my professors actually was my first manager at Mandiant. So Jerry Stellatos, so he was...
He listens to the show, so...
Hey, Jerry.
What's up, Jerry?
Quick shout out.
Yeah, so he was actually one of my professors before he was my manager at
Awesome.
at Mandiant, so yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So
I love hearing all the backgrounds of how the different ways people get into the industry and kind of the variety it takes. So
Yeah.
So so in your role, kind of tracking all these different groups and going through all the incident response investigation data, you're obviously one of the main people putting together M-Trends. So if people haven't seen, this week we released the annual report. We've done it now. This is our 10th year.
10th year.
So that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Do you want to give some of the history of why we kind of got into it?
Yeah, it's a little light reading, just 76 pages, but
So it is.
I kid. So we started 10 years ago, and kind of the history and genesis of it was, it was much harder to talk publicly about kind of the things we were doing in incident response perspective. And as we've gotten bigger, it's actually easier to discuss things because there's a lot more things that we're seeing, so there's more general trends. So this is our way, kind of a decade ago, of originally starting to talk about what we were seeing in a way that we could kind of abstract it a little bit and give higher level things and observations from all the myriad of incident investigations we were doing. So
yeah, it makes it a little bit easier. Everyone feels like it's speaking about them, even if it's speaking about multiple clients. And this year we have like 750 investigations. So it's nice to be able to step back and maybe give a little bit more detail, what we've seen across them in a way that protects our clients, retains our trust and all that.
Sure.
So, and nice to sort of force all the Mandiant consultants to step back and like write up some of their work because they're busy.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing with M-Trends is being able, you were so inundated like with the details of the cases that we work specifically. It's a time to like step back and like, all right, on the macro level, what are the actual trends? Because like I may feel that something is really like prevalent, but that's only because those are the cases that I worked.
It happens to be Fin 7, so Regina's all over that.
Right, exactly. So like that was the only attacker, like because that's all that I saw or all that I worked. And the same thing also, we notice what's most recent to us. So what happened in October, November, December is more prevalent in our memory as opposed to remembering what happened back in January or February. It really is. Because like at the end of the year, you're like, what happened this year? Right. People have a hard time accurately recalling that.
So it's nice to go back and actually look at that data for this.
And you had to read, is it every report or?
Well, so it's the whole process is broken amongst our team. So thankfully I have help, but like I am like the primary person. So what ends up being reading hundreds of reports to go back and pull out data, be like, did we actually find a targeted attacker here? How long was the attacker in the environment? How did the client become aware of this? How were they notified? What was the detection mechanism? We look at the initial infection vector. We look at different operation components. Was there exfil involved? So like we do a lot of these things, and that's basically being pulled from the report or whatever final deliverable, maybe status updates.
Sure.
And so like going through all that nitty gritty detail.
So what are the big stats that we've tracked, I guess, that we're showing those trends across?
Yeah, so M-Trends, the big things that we put in there are dwell time, the notification, and then breakdown per industry. So dwell time, to define that, is actually from the first evidence of attacker activity up until the notification or detection date by the client. So that period of time, how long were they in the environment before the client actually knew what was going on?
This was always the one in the earliest report where we kind of shared, do you remember what the original was?
I think it was like 400
and something days.
416 days, so from 2011. It was the very
first one that we started tracking.
Up until this year, and that's for the median dwell time. So we used median to get rid of those outliers at both ends, so finding that middle point. Compared, so 416 days back in 2011, then now we're at 78 days for the current present for 2018. Nice. So huge difference there.
And year over year,
I think it went from 101
last year to 78.
It's hard to like read too much into it because there's a lot of different nuance, but people tend to use that as a marker for where we're going. Purely from it evens out when you put over 750 data points, but the goal for us always, of course, is to decrease that dwell time as much as possible. Like that is absolutely what the industry needs to be doing, is having median time to detection as short as possible.
And it's also important to note that there is inherent bias in our data because it's based on the cases and the investigations that we do. So the stuff that we see tends to be a little bit more complex. Is that advanced persistent threat? It's not that simple thing that the client is going to remediate themselves.
You get, if you get an alert for something that happened today and you remediate it, you're probably not going to give us a phone call. So it is sample bias, but I would say it's probably consistent sample bias. So at least year over year,
absolutely,
it's helpful or instructive to see how those numbers are trending.
Yeah.
So what we're like, so if the numbers went from dwell time of 101 to in the 70s, what was the key driving factor to bringing that down? So
what I love to look at is the spread of that data over the different time periods. So if you look at 30 days or less specifically, in 2018, 31% of the investigations were 30 days or less for that dwell time, compared to last year was only 28%. So we see that uptick by 3%. And then looking at the high end of the scale from 700 days or more, last year that was 23% or 21% of the total investigations, now down to 12%.
Okay, so the high end of like really, really long running breaches is coming down.
So the high end is coming down, and we're seeing more on the low end.
Nice.
So like the whole
median's looking good, but the whole data set's going in the right direction.
The whole data set is going in the right direction. So not just looking at the median, but the whole component. And so we see some of the reasons for that would be increased ransomware, increased crypto miner cases. So some of those things that we are detecting quicker and able to remediate that faster. And also just like better tooling and better technology.
Yeah, I feel like even just in the last like 3 or 4 years, both the security technology has come a long way from a defensive perspective, and then also just teams are way more mature in terms of their ability to actually either through the products they have in doing detection, but also really starting to incorporate things like hunting. You know, that's not something 4 years ago we even really. Maybe only the most sophisticated customers we work with were really doing that, and I think now that's becoming a lot more organizations are to do that as kind of part of their standard practice.
Right. Yeah.
And all those things I think are helping contribute to organizations.
So some of these more mature organizations that are like identifying stuff internally, I thought that was a cool piece we've had and that we trend on is that other stat for notification, whether it came from internal or external. So can you speak to that for people who haven't checked it out yet?
So we do break that down, and we look at internal notification if the client identified or discovered the incident themselves first, compared to external notification. It was FireEye that notified them by an alert, or it was through some sort of
third party or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like
or
the
some
FBI,
of the financial
CPP. So they
common point of purchase.
Yep, if they were notified by some sort of financial institution that they are the common point of purchase. So those are different external components. We're seeing 59% are doing internal notification versus 41% external notification. So more often than not, it's an internal notification that's like getting that ball rolling as opposed to waiting for some external source. And then if you look at the median dwell times for just those two components, internal notifications are 50.5 days is that median point, as opposed to 184 days for an external notification.
And that kind of makes sense. The more mature organizations are.
Yep, for sure. So if they're notifying, if they're detecting it internally, they're much quicker, and like that is their wheelhouse. But if it's something that isn't in their wheelhouse, it's taking longer for getting that external component to loop back around.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep, absolutely.
And then the core kind of things we trend on are dwell time, the notification, whether it's internal, external, and then industry targeting.
Yeah, so industry is also really interesting, looking from a decade ago to now. So this year I believe it's 23% were financial, and then we have retail.
Financial being like banks in that sector, or financial being like they were financially motivated?
Banks and things of that nature, not
targeted industry.
Yeah,
okay, cool.
So it's the targeted industry, not the attacker. And then so that was our highest one at 23%, but then with like categories 3 through 5, it was like financial, then
retail, right?
Retail and hospitality was in there, high tech, and
I'm guessing that probably trended down a little bit from Fin7's kind of apex activity. But
exactly.
They're still really high. It's crazy. Like when I was looking at the breakout by industry, seeing like, government and defense industrial base being a fairly small segment, and high tech being pretty big but small overall. Like the pie chart has a lot of industries.
There's comparing a lot of distribution.
10 years ago when that's Mandiant's bread and butter.
Yeah, I mean,
or
10 years ago it was just financial, like banks or retail or government and defense contractors. That was pretty much it 10 years ago.
Yeah,
and then that's changed pretty significantly.
Yep, government this year I believe was 5%. So it is interesting that now it's all across the industries and a pretty good spread.
Yeah.
So.
From your perspective, like the mix of threat actors that we saw in 2018 versus 17, like how would you characterize who we saw and how that changed?
So like if you just look the big APT groups in general, in 2017, obviously that was very Iran focused, and this year we had a pretty good spread between North Korea, Iran, and China. So like having the Iran activity kind of come down and other threat groups kind of coming up, like it was a very interesting shift there. So.
And then on the financial side, has there been a trend or a shift between 2017 and 2018?
Yeah, so we've also seen a lot of public indictments of several major threat actors. Fin7 is a really good example of.
I walked by the FBI booth and we were like 4 for 4 on the wanted poster, so that was pretty solid.
That was pretty rad. And so like seeing these public indictments and things, and also being able to actually see the trending of that activity like coming down, like it's pretty cool. So a big, you guys mentioned sort of the North Korean activity, Iranian activity, and Chinese activity. And so as a part of our report, we also recap the groups that we promote into a named APT group. So we've talked about it a little bit before. Andrew Thompson, your colleague, and Dan Perez, also on the adversary pursuit team. We've talked a little bit about the merging. I think the audio is a little bit better these days for some of the stuff Andrew talked about. So could you just recap just quickly how we get to those, like how you handle the clustering of activity to promote into those groups? Yeah, so with part of our modeling of our data, we create if we can't identify specifically that this is part of another group, we create what we call UNC groups, UNC for uncategorized, but it's a specific cluster of activity that is unique to itself. And so we create this group, and that will include like whatever their TTPs are, the malware, the C2, like type of methodology. We look at their targeting, what their objectives are, the kind of the goals. So we define these little groups, and then we look at merging groups. So like, is there some sort of thing that we can show an overlap between their TTPs, between targeting these things? And then once we have what we feel is pretty much full picture of a threat group, we consider them for graduation to our APT and our Fin groups. And full picture being like, basically we know what they do post-compromise. Post-compromise is the best thing if we've responded. Right. We sort of know what they're after, which tells you the most about who's probably behind it. And that graduation is like, once we know like the sponsoring organization, if it's a nation or if it's a criminal organization, right? Yeah, absolutely. So we want to know the full picture. So how do they initially get into an environment? How do they target their environments? What are their objectives? What do they do to maintain their presence in the environment? Yeah. What is their end goal? Like, how are they completing their mission? So looking at that full attack life cycle, understanding that looking at groups that have targeted more than one organization, looking at, so we want to see them in multiple different ways. So a group that would be very bad for graduation would be that we only saw a phishing campaign to one organization. Yeah, right. So like that's not enough information to be able to draw. So we want that full picture. Well, and a lot of times, if take the phishing campaign example, our ability, I think, or most organizations' ability to do attribution based off of just, say, a phishing campaign is really difficult because the chance that you're going to have either infrastructure overlap or tool overlap or something else is probably the lowest at that kind of initial compromise stage. And then it goes higher as we then see them operate within an environment. There's more data points we can use to pull together. But if you just see that one data point, having high-level confidence in that is just really tough. Also, as people start preventing attacks a little bit more, it makes it harder because there's interesting stuff that happens. It was like, in our data set, nothing got through, cool, and then like, damn it, from a attribution standpoint, like there's maybe a more interesting thing. So, if you want to check out the groups, again, APT37 and APT38 from North Korea, APT39 from Iran, and 40 from China. If you want to go back and learn more about APT40, definitely check out the blog post, the M-Trend stuff. We talked about it in episode 2 with Debo. And I think also episode 5. Episode 5, yeah. I think we labeled that one Down Periscope. So they're called Periscope. Although they, interestingly, like we merged them with this other group, Jumper. Yeah, we took 2 clusters of activity that we publicly talked about as Temp Periscope and Temp Jumper. We got enough analytical confidence that we could combine them, and so when we talk about APT40, it's actually the union of those 2 different kind of clusters of activity we were tracking. So and then in M-Trends, we go on to talk about country-specific observations on sort of the big 4, big 5 that we highlight in the report. I think what I liked about that is, so we talk about the 4 groups we upgraded and give kind of a basic overview. So if you want to learn about those and read more, you can read the report. But then we actually, like per country, did almost like a 10-year retrospective. 10-year retrospective of Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China, and how they
how their targeting profile and activity changed over year, and the level of sophistication changed in kind of major, I guess, categories, and where they started and how they've kind of ebbed and flowed over time, because that's different per country.
That's the stuff that a lot of people hear about. I actually want to spend a little bit of time to talk about some groups that have remained those uncategorized clusters as a backdrop for some of the other stuff that's in MTrends, but some really kind of cool stories. Like straightforward, I feel like there's sometimes criticism of private corporations that do full-on Intel attribution to the sponsoring organization. Some people say you shouldn't do that. And steering clear of that debate for the most part, it's worth highlighting why we do that. And the best example I can think of, we actually highlighted MTrends, which is we identify the sponsoring organization even if it's a red team. We want to know what company, we want to know enough to know that activity is a red team. Now, why might we want to do that?
Well, the key thing for us is, we're going to alert on activity that is malicious. A red team is an emulation of malicious activity. And for either, especially for our managed defense or incident response teams, we need to be able to sort out when you find the malicious activity. Like, you don't want to waste a bunch of cycles chasing it down to then find out it's a red team. Like, the earlier you can figure that out, the better, because then you're not, or let's say you're looking at like previous compromised environment, red teams leave activity too. And so you're doing historical forensics with an environment. The activity, it was a red team that happened a year ago. You don't know necessarily whether that's red team or not. Sometimes you need to, work with your client and ask them and say, hey, we found all this activity. It doesn't really relate to this other.
In MTrends, we highlighted this thing that happened that was kind of cool a couple months ago. And we had a client that we were doing like 24/7 monitoring for with managed defense. And they had some activity that we let them know about. I think again, Debo helped identify some of the ways to find it. We surfaced that and let them know, hey, you have some activity in your environment. It happened to be Cobalt Strike and a couple other commercially available tools and some publicly available tools. And they said, we're actually having a red team right now, stand down. I said, okay. Then Regina's team.
Yeah, my team.
Went together.
I can't take credit for that, but
you're part of the broader team. That's okay. It's okay.
It's just I don't see anyone else here. So it's Regina.
Yeah. Well, our team ran that to the ground and actually found enough evidence to go back and say, no, we think this is distinct activity, and to go back to the client, and that's huge to go back to the client.
Say, we don't think this is a red team.
We disagree with you, and we think that this is actually malicious activity.
And by that time, they were, I think, infecting like 10 or 12 systems per hour, and just like rapidly moving through the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And then to be able to go back and then have that information so quickly that they were able to remediate. I think it was 5.5 hours from start to finish to be like.
And it spun up the Mandiant guys that got in and assisted, and it was like 32 compromised systems that were controlled and contained. And like at that clip, I don't remember if they got DA, like they were just moving fast. And to be able to come in and do that, point is, that's why attributing to a sponsoring organization is valuable for us for how we do our work.
Right, exactly. So we're going to track that group as a group, and even though it comes back and say, oh yeah, that's.
So red teamers, I'd say we got your number, but I think we gave you a number. So, you have a number.
But I think that also brings to light how more APT groups are using publicly available tools and the same as red team using custom and looking more.
There's definitely more convergence. I think I said before, nation states are looking more like red teams for a variety of reasons. It wasn't a dig on red teams. The converse is also true. Red teams are looking more like attackers and kind of playing with each other.
Well, on the red team side, I think that's their organizations in general who are doing red teams, I think, are stepping their game up to look, do more sophisticated things and look more like a real adversary.
We should have talked about one of those in MTrends, right? So we had one other kind of cool case study. We'll just keep it high level because we're going to force the people that wrote it, I think, to be on the show. But talked about if this stood on its own, it was us recapping an APT group. It would be one of the coolest stories, I think, of the year for us. Just the amount of detail, bypassing multiple two-factor applications to get in and compromise ATMs and financial applications over a couple of these hurdles.
Not using a spear phishing email to break in, but using a combination of social engineering and then setting up a web page and then getting credentials. So
that's our red team's favorite method right now. They do primarily that, from what I understand, is not phishing but social engineering. Back to that and getting people to subvert security controls.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
So No, it's just we kind of have all sides of it. I think we also talked. There's a couple other case studies. It doesn't do them justice, particularly high level, but there's like an extorted victim who.
Yeah, there was an extorted victim who, it's a Chinese group that we track. What's interesting is they use a bunch of tools that other Chinese threat actors use, like Sogu and photo backdoors and those things. But their motivation actually seems more like it might be financial, like they were extorting the victim, looking for trying to get money, and that's not something you'd normally associate with nation state activity.
Gets back to the older like moonlighting type activity that was more prevalent.
Right. It was more prevalent, and we've seen it from time to time with a couple of different kind of clusters of activity that we track.
Why did they put Mimikatz on a Linux server, right? In that case, they hosted it there.
Yeah, they hosted it. They hosted the Mimikatz instance and then deployed it to a bunch of systems. Yeah. But yeah, that was a kind of unique one. We don't see Linux compromise in every case, but I think that's I'd say a general trend over the last like 3 or 4 years, where whereas it was very much accepted in 1 out of 100, now I think it's probably more.
One thing we do see on most cases, which we highlighted in the report, is business email compromise and some of the bypasses associated with that.
Yeah.
Too. So we took a little bit of time, I think, to talk about how prevalent that is.
The business email compromise is interesting because you can have an organization wire a pretty significant amount of money and have no malware at all, right? Like you email the controller of a company or somebody in finance and potentially just to engage with them. Like you're not sending them a phishing attachment or a link. You're just trying to get engagement. And then once you get engagement, you may have spoofed, say, the CEO, their email address, or at least their friendly name, or maybe you get somebody to call you, or you can call them and you convince them that, hey, we're about to go acquire this company, and because of SEC rules, you can't tell anybody, and we need you to wire, money. And they'll sometimes even have like a really sophisticated, of course, it's a British accent because they're sophisticated, but they know all the different controls you have to have, and like two-person authentication, not two-factor, but like one person wire the money and another person prove it, and they know all the right things to say to convince organizations. So sometimes we get phone calls from organizations like, we're either worried that it was an insider or that they were breached, and we actually have to walk them through kind of what we're seeing. We're like, no, I mean, like they were effectively duped and social engineered through a combination of either business email compromise or
spoofing,
and maybe even a phone call.
CEO impersonation stuff. The I don't know, it's not an M-Trends. It just happened like recently. One of these ones that I don't know if I'm supposed to share, but kind of funny. Just to flex on that, some attacker was phishing people within the company and doing CEO impersonation simply to tell people to go to the CEO's office. It was just trolling. So I have no idea what it was, but we heard kind of like go to this customer comes in and they're like, yes, now go bring your documents to the CEO. People are walking in and trying to figure out what was going on. So I was like,
that's pretty good.
It's pretty solid, like
troll-based
insider operations. Something very enjoyable about that. But one thing that I always like is this is not just supposed to be a bad news report. This year more than ever, we took a lot of time to have our awesome remediation team. Matthew McWhort, I think, and his team spent a lot of time writing up some of their what they call like pre-mediation, like all the things they get in and do when they're responding to all these breaches, helping people do everything they can up front.
So there's a bunch of great questions in M-Trends in that pre-mediation section where like questions you can ask yourself as an organization about how you'd handle different scenarios and things that we often do, working with clients to up their maturity and ability to either respond to an incident or prepare for one. So great material in there. Also, common remediation guidance, or at least pre-remediation guidance around how to handle things like
hardening tips
for things like Active Directory or endpoint and local accounts and those things. So really pretty solid information from that team. So
definitely don't need to wait till you're compromised to do these things.
You can get on it right now and be a step ahead of the game.
Yep.
Perfect. I think that's was there anything else from M-Trends that you guys wanted to highlight, or RSA? You can look forward to me wearing random swag on future episodes until I get my hand slapped.
Yeah, he will accept future swag if you send it. No, I mean, every year I think the one commonality every year, just from like a marketing perspective, is it's funny to see how every company uses like the same terms, and it changes from year to year, but somehow everyone like standardizes. So it's like I don't know.
Not sure if they consciously do it or that everyone's just kind of in the same
I don't know.
space.
But yeah, it's like 2 years ago it was all the endpoint stuff, and last year it was like orchestration, and this year, or no, last year it was like big data, and this year it's orchestration and machine learning and AI, and so I mean that's one concept that won't change. Like, the specifics will, but not the.
We'll all be talking about it.
Yeah.
Yep. Perfect.
Cool. Well, thanks for your time.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, Regina.
Yeah.
And
Cheers.
we'll catch you next time.